It's intermission time. It's great to get out to the movies.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Megan Braun, the host of the Intermission podcast produced by The Synagogue. And today I'm going to be doing a solo episode. We're going to dive into Backrooms, directed by Kane Parson and distributed by A24. I have not done a solo deep dive in honestly a very long time. I think we just had a lot of really cool guests and we were booked and busy. And now I want to take things a little bit slower, I guess, with the podcast and be a little bit more intentional about the films we talk about. And this, to me, felt like a perfect movie to pause on and focus on. Of course, Obsession will come up too, just because Backrooms and Obsession have this like linked success that's happening right now. I'll get into that later. But yeah, so I'm just going to share some context on the film, some critiques that it's getting, my film watching experience. I think a little bit less on my personal analysis and more just like the general analysis I'm seeing. I say this a lot on the podcast, but like, I'm not a film critic. I just like watching movies, and I like hearing what other people have to say. So to me, this is more of like almost an audio essay of everything I've compiled. You know, when you watch a movie and you do that like rapid researching, YouTubing, Reddit rabbit hole after you watch something impactful, that's essentially what this is. And I hope you guys enjoy. So let's get into it. Like I said, Backrooms was directed by Kane Parson and distributed by A24. And the screenplay specifically is credited to Will Sudick, a writer known more for TV work like Ash vs. Evil Dead, Westworld, Homeland are some examples of their previous work. And while there were already drafts that existed of Backrooms, Will was the sole credited screenwriter for the final version. And then we have cinematographer Jeremy Cox, who actually, fun fact, but previously worked on Mile End Kicks, which is a film by Chandler Levack, and she was just a guest of ours, and Mile End Kicks was her second ever feature film. It's really great. I really recommend it. And I just thought that was like a fun connection to a previous conversation we had here on Intermission. And what makes Backrooms especially interesting is not just the film itself, but it's where it comes from. It's not our traditional adaptation. It's not based on like a novel or a franchise in the usual sense, because it emerged from the internet itself, and specifically a viral horror myth that began on 4chan in 2019 and then evolved through online communities and eventually made its way into this major studio feature film. So it's interesting because it's an intersection between like internet culture, collective storytelling, modern horror filmmaking, and I think that is what the draw is it feels different, it feels fresh, it also feels community based, like we the people have contributed to this concept, we the people online. So the original prompt, like I said, which was on 4chan in 2019, 4chan is like an online community. I've honestly never used it. I'm more of a Reddit person, but I guess there was a post or a prompt asking users to share disquieting images that feel just off. And I guess one person responded with an image of a yellow, empty office-like space with fluorescent lighting. And alongside the image came a short piece of text that said, if you're not careful and you no clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless backroom noise of fluorescent lights and maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has hurt you. And I think what's important about this original concept is that horror is not centered, or this horror specifically, is not centered on monsters and violence in the traditional sense, but it's rooted in like a psychological unease, and that fear comes from disorientation, from loneliness, repetition, being trapped in this space that looks like reality, but it's fundamentally wrong. And I will get into critiques. I do think this is part of the reason that this film doesn't resonate with a lot of people, is because that's not horrifying to some. We all have a thing that freaks us out, whether that's like satanic demon shit, could be scary to one person versus someone else is like truly a jump scare will get me every time, versus someone who is more of kind of like a skinamarink type of fan and they like a slow burn. It's definitely for a specific type of audience. And so over time, this idea expanded far beyond the original post, and internet users began building onto it collectively, adding hundreds of levels of entities and survival rules and maps and alternate interpretations of what the backrooms actually are. So there's no single canon or truth. There never really was like one set of guidelines, because it's all just iterations of this concept. And Kane Parsons wasn't like the original creator. He wasn't the original 4chan poster, but what he did create was the most influential modern interpretation of it through his YouTube series, The Backrooms Found Footage. And his version introduced elements of the async corporation, government experimentation, more of like a science fiction framework layered on top of the liminal horror concept. And so for many younger viewers, maybe like Gen Z, or whoever was into this is like the version of the backrooms they're most familiar with. But yeah, I think that ambiguity is part of what makes it so compelling. And also just the fact that people, I'm sure, feel like they're a part of this history that was made in this world. Okay, so Kane Parsons and the internet origin. Kane was only 16 years old when he created the viral Backrooms in 2022 on YouTube, which is so cool and so inspiring, I think, to all young people. And me, myself, I'm a young person. And I just love the mentality of someone is interested in something and they go create it. They have no like specific intent for the outcome, but they're creating because they have that desire and that interest. It's not like he was pitching it to be for Hollywood or a larger franchise. It was just like an experiment and exploration. Felt like it wasn't fully realized yet. And I think that's what makes it so much more enticing. He was using tools like Blender and After Effects to bring the idea to life, which I was interested in how he did that. Blender is a cool tool because it has like 3D elements that or I guess the whole thing is really 3D concepts. And I'm a graphic designer myself. If you listen to the podcast, you've probably heard me mention that a few times. So I love hearing the logistics of how someone creates something. I have barely touched Blender ever, but After Effects I'm in like every day. So it was just cool to hear the how. And the result was that the found footage style short films like quickly spread online. And so that online success led to the development of a feature film that A24 got on board, making Parsons actually the youngest director in the studio's history, which is so exciting. And then the film also brings together a significant creative team. Like I said above, Will Sudik wrote the screenplay. Then Osgood Perkins is also tied to this. Most, I'm sure, know this, but son of Psycho's Anthony Perkins. He served as a producer, and he has that background and that knowledge of the more like slow burn psychological horror. He's worked on films such as The Blackcoat's Daughter, Gretel and Hansel. I feel like most famously Longlegs, maybe. I knew him through his acting in Legally Blonde originally, which is forever the funniest fucking tidbit in his history of work. And then alongside these two and this team in general was James Wan, filmmaker and producer, most known for shaping like mainstream horror films through franchises like Saw, Insidious, The Conjuring universe. He is kind of like the more commercial franchise-driven side of horror filmmaking to come in here. And so like together, all these creative forces represent something unusual because this is like an internet born idea, but getting its sensibilities into like the mainstream world through these different individuals that are masters of their craft. And the shift kind of reflects something larger happening culturally. Internet communities are no longer just consuming media and taking it in, but they're actively creating it and participating in it. And I do think that Hollywood is and has to pay attention to those types of spaces. I really hope, I'm going to get into this later, but I really hope the success of this movie and Obsession are just lessons to be learned about wanting to see new faces, wanting to see new directors, new voices and concepts. We're itching for it, obviously. Okay, so now I wanted to dedicate a section to logistics of set design, the visual effects, production, because I had a lot of questions about this. I was wondering like how much of it was real and fake. And so Of course, one of the most striking aspects of Backrooms is how physically real it feels on screen. And it's not primarily through digital effects, actually, but through extensive physical production design, which is always good to hear. The Backrooms environments were largely constructed as real sets rather than full CGI environments. Long modular hallways were built, along with repeating office rooms designed to create a sense of endless repetition. Fluorescent lighting rigs were physically installed, designed to buzz and flicker and hum, which I bet also is really just helpful for the actors. Like, the more literal you can get, you're in that world. So the sets were built like large sound stages, warehouse spaces, allowing the filmmakers to shoot these like long continuous tracking shots and giving that illusion of the characters are walking deeper and deeper into an infinite space. Much of the infinite feeling of Backrooms is created through repetition. So like there'll be identical set pieces that were reused and rearranged and shot at different angles to create like a forced perspective to stretch out the environment they were using for its full capability. And then for the creatures, the entities, practical effects being used, which is great. I think what's really impressive about this film is all the makeup and you'll see these creatures down in the back rooms, and the way that they appear is just a feat. I bet it was really fun to work on doing the makeup and the practical effects there. I know that CGI was used, but I think more in a supportive sense to like extend the environments beyond the physical sets and clean up like more technical elements, enhance the atmosphere. And then of course like cinematography plays a crucial role in setting the illusion. I feel like the critiques that I've seen, no one can argue that it wasn't like a visually captivating movie, because again, like this entire concept was born from an image, which is very cool source material. Okay, so now time to get into plot and overview. So at its core, Backrooms follows Clark, a divorced furniture store owner in San Jose. Shout out San Jose, that's where I'm from. I forget if I'm planning to talk about that later. I think I am, but I didn't even notice that this film was going to be a Bay Area thing. So I got a little too excited when I noticed that. But Clark is in a state of emotional and psychological collapse. Like, he is in the middle of going to therapy. You can tell this is like someone who is not doing hot. So while sleeping in the basement of his store, he discovers a seam in the wall. It almost looks like a little like flicker of light. I was trying to think of how they accomplished that in the film, but a little sliver of light that leads into another space entirely, the back rooms. And it's an endless labyrinth of interconnected rooms that resemble kind of office buildings or commercial spaces, but with subtle distortions that make them feel wrong. So it's like, you know, when you wake up from a dream and you're trying to recount your dream, but everything is just like slightly wrong because your memory can't recall everything. And then the more and more you tell that story, the farther and farther it gets from what actually happened. Like, that is what the Backrooms is. There was even actually a really cool shot in it where it goes down floor to floor to floor and showing like the different renditions of a room, and then the next variation of that room, the next, and it just gets farther and farther from the source material. It was a very literal but perfect representation of like, that is what the Backrooms is. And so Clark becomes obsessed with this discovery of the backrooms at the bottom of his shop, and he begins exploring and mapping out and trying to understand the rules of this space. The film is intentionally set in the 1990s, and I think this is an important creative choice because it removes modern tools of investigation and communication. Like I said before, Clark is going through it, like before he even goes to the backrooms, he's gone through a painful divorce or a separation. I forget if it was actually final yet, and he's struggling with alcoholism. He is haunted by his failed ambitions of being an architect. Like, there's all these pinned up sketches of architectural plans in his office at work. It's looming over him. And he is like the exact type of person where everyone else is the problem but him. His wife, who I'm pretty sure he calls fat, which multiple times, which is not cool. But he is just like the classic, everyone else is the problem, life is happening to me, I don't happen to life type of person, which is like one of my least favorite types of people. And so his emotional state makes him particularly vulnerable to like having this type of fascination with the backrooms. I mean, this is spoiler territory. I would assume anyone listening to this episode, though, with that knowledge that this is a spoiler world, but what they discover is that the backrooms is not simply a location, but it's like an entity. It reacts to memories, it reconstructs fragments of reality and creates imperfect copies of people and objects, and those are referred to as still lifes. And they're distorted versions of human beings built from like incomplete memories and perception. It is your dream-like memories, but in a physical sense and in a nightmare sense, because they're freaking terrifying looking and feeling and behaving. And then there's this other layer to the film that's happening with this corporation organization known as the Async Research Institute, and it plays a larger role more in the background of the story. I wouldn't say it's a primary focus in the plot of this film specifically, but the Async originally began as a manufacturer of MRI machines, but eventually discovered the existence of backrooms through signals and distortions or whatever, and their goal becomes mapping and understanding the space and potentially, I mean, classic corporation government character in any movie, but like exploiting what they find for commercial use. Okay, critiques. These are just different critiques I found online that I'm trying to compile to be a little bit concise here. Despite obviously the film's strengths of atmosphere and the concept itself and the strong cast, it has gotten some mixed responses for like pacing and structure. I think one of the most common criticisms I saw was the pacing in the first half feels slow, and there's like long stretches where little appears to happen. Also, there wasn't enough variation with the environments, which reduces the sense of like exploration that the concept naturally promises, which I understand, like you kind of see the same parts of the backrooms in the movie, so it actually does feel kind of small because you start to get, as a viewer, familiar with the format of backrooms and like how to enter and where to exit. I mean, that's a logistics thing, but it does feel like, oh yeah, I wouldn't get lost in there. I kind of get the layout, obviously, until you see the scene where it shows the staircase and the levels and levels, almost like Monsters Inc. style of all the doors. Do you realize how large it is? But I do get that like the film doesn't cover much ground in regards to like location. And then pacing, I mean, to address the pacing comment, I think that's just a personal preference thing. If you don't like a slow burn, you don't like a slow burn. That's on you. It's not the right style of movie for you. And I think it's assumed that this would be that style of movie. So that's all I have to say to that. Okay, and then there are also criticisms I've seen are surrounding Clark's psychological arc. While his descent into obsession and instability is clear and established, there were some critiques, and I actually did feel this way, that the transition into his more extreme behavior, like that dinner scene and the therapist coming down, that all of a sudden just felt abrupt to me without like a visible progression. Like obviously we know time has passed, the therapist seeing all the mail that's been piling up, we've been given clues that time has passed, but it just felt like a bit shocking, the abrupt change in his nature. Other critiques are talking about like elements being so ambiguous or underexplained. I think movies are not meant to be heavy-handed, but I will say the like async and the mechanics of the MRI connection to backrooms, that is really intriguing, and I would be curious to have had a little bit more context there. But those were just like the main critiques I saw, I guess, was like pacing related, the abrupt transitions, the monster itself, the goofy nature of how he appeared. I do think it kind of made sense that the villain, the monster, was like slightly goofy looking, because if this is kind of like a dreamlike memory state, your memories are based off of things you've actually seen in real life, right? And so like this is like a rendition obviously of the pirate from the store. I'm just zooming out for a moment and realizing if someone hasn't seen this movie, everything I'm saying sounds psychotic. Anyways, if the monster were to be more like demonic or freaky looking, I just feel like that doesn't come from your memory of something you've seen before. Like that is something that had to have been created, not from previous encounters. I hope that makes sense. So like to me, the monster being goofy, I'm like, well, yeah, when I have a nightmare and there's something chasing me in my dream, it is an accumulation of probably stuff I've seen in movies and I've seen out in the world jumbled up together. And so it's not some like freaky shit I've never seen before because I need a reference point for my mind to call back to. That's just a thought. I don't know if anyone's going to get what I'm saying there. Another thing I thought was interesting was Mark Duplass was in this movie. He played one of the agents or whatever at that organization, the MRI company. And he posted this video online I saw kind of defending Kane Parsons because I guess people were saying like Kane was not really the director, like there were other people helping him, and Mark Duplass's video basically said those are baseless and uninformed critiques, and he was like, were you guys on set? Like, I was on set, and Parsons was 100% in control and much more prepared than much older directors, which I believe. If you're young and you have something to prove and you're excited, I can imagine you come in there hot with a ton to say. And this is coming from a passion project of his that he's been living in, you know, for ages as in a few years, but still. Here is a critique I saw online that I also agree with as well, and a friend of mine mentioned this too, is that it was a bit bothering that you could just come and go as you pleased in the back rooms. It would have been more terrifying if the entrance disappeared once you went inside, because like that's what makes it, that feeling of like icky, unnerving, scary, is being trapped. And so just the fact that you can like come and go, that I think loses its feeling of like suffocation that would really get me as a person if I was in that scenario and as a viewer of this movie. Okay, so then to get into memorable moments in the movie and online theories. So I mentioned this up top, but like one thing I personally loved about the film is that it takes place in the Bay. Being from San Jose, I immediately noticed the references to Santa Clara County. I think they even said something about Capitol Expressway. And there were also smaller details like Clark wearing a Santa Cruz t-shirt while he was lying in bed watching TV in the shop. And for whatever reason, the concept feels strangely appropriate to be a Northern California setting. I think like the mixture of suburban sprawl, office parks, like industrial buildings, the beige architecture, honestly, like it feels a bit liminal. And so the location choice, I think, works for me there. And then, like I said previously about the monsters, beyond the setting, what really stayed with me is how effective the movie captured the feeling of childhood nightmares. Like the little tiny staircase, the lack of railings, the requirement to like crawl and squeeze through narrow spaces, bottomless pits, a giant man pursuing through endless hallways. It felt really familiar in hard ways to explain. Like those are nightmares I would assume most of us have had, unless I'm like fucked in the head. And it's not like this like realistic horror, it's a dreamlike horror. And it's more of just a feeling, like that unease feeling that you get. It just feels icky. A major theme that stood out to me and that I've seen online doing research post-watch is that Clark's greatest enemy isn't the monster, it's himself. He is the monster. And throughout the film, Clark constantly avoids accountability for the damage he's caused. Like I said up top about like the problem is everyone else but him. It's his wife, it's his circumstances. Rather than accepting responsibility for his failures, he remains trapped both literally and obviously metaphorically inside of the world of the furniture store and the back rooms. In the film, I think suggests repeatedly that being stuck is a choice as much as it is a circumstance, which I 1,000% agree with. Like I said, I hate this type of personality. I hate when people complain and don't do anything about it, and so that stuck with me. The interpretation also connects to what I think the movie is saying about like masculinity and accountability, which I didn't come up with this thought on my own. I saw it online and I resonated, but many of the women in Clark's life suffer because of his inability to confront his own behavior. His wife, Barbara, Mary, the therapist, even Kat, the employee, played by Lukita, they never wanted to, like Lukita specifically, her character never wanted to be involved in the expedition. They're all harmed in some way by Clark's refusal to change. And so the movie seems interested in examining how self-deception and denial can ripple outward and affect everyone around a person. And specifically here, it happened to be the women. And then another detail that was fascinating was like Clark's furniture business almost feels like a metaphor for the backrooms themselves. And like specifically, I mean, the commercial he did that they had him film where he was the pirate, his commercials are like essentially attempts to imitate larger competitors. They're copies of something else, but imperfect copies. Like his whole acting scene of doing the pirate is just like a bootleg version of other furniture store commercials, but he's like, it's a failed attempt. He falls, he looks dumb. He spends his life surrounded by cheap imitations. There's something to be said also, like the irony of him working in a furniture store when he wants to be an architect. And then I think one of the more memorable scenes involves Clark and Mary's bizarre dinner sequence. I don't know if this was explicitly said, but like that still life was present during that scene with the redhead was meant to represent Clark's wife. Obviously, they have similar physical characteristics, and he discusses how the two of them have already role played his argument that he had with his wife in real life, and it didn't go very well. But what I find interesting is that still life woman who represents his ex-wife or estranged wife, she's like the only one who reacts in immediate terror when the pirate Clark approaches. Even just the sound of him, she like runs the other direction and freaks out. And if like still lifes are inherent fragments of personalities and memories of people they imitate, it like kind of gives this disturbing question of like Clark's relationship with Barbara, and was she terrified of him in real life? And then, like, of course, Pirate Clark is representing Clark's true self. Like, throughout the movie, every memory anyone shares about Clark is negative. He mistreats his employees, like, verbally abuses his wife. He lashes out on his therapist, Mary. But he somehow is, like, viewing himself as the victim in every situation. And so, like, according to that interpretation, Pirate Clark is the version of Clark that everyone else sees, like the abusive, the selfish, alcoholic version of Clark that he refuses to acknowledge, which everyone is scared of. Also, while I'm here at the dinner scene, I'm also, a question, I guess this should have gone in my critique section, but a question I'm still having is, like, Kat's head in the fridge. And, like, did he eat Kat? Is that what that was implying? Because that was the real Kat. That wasn't a replication of Kat. That was her real head. So was that something he was doing to survive? I didn't really get an answer to that through my digging or have a theory on it, really. And then another interpretation I saw, which would be interesting, is like the still lifes don't attack Clark like they do others because they view him as fundamentally similar to Pirate Clark. Like, rather than seeing him as another victim, they recognize him as another monster. And so, like, maybe that's why Clark is able to survive among them for so long, which is creepy. And then, obviously, we need to get into Mary's storyline. Mary's the therapist who, there's flashbacks to her growing up in a home with a mom who is mentally unwell, clearly like a hoarder who's not letting her daughter leave their home. Mary's childhood trauma is the foundation of her entire relationship with the Backrooms. Her mother suffered from severe and undiagnosed, potentially mental illness, forcing Mary to spend much of her childhood isolated. And this experience mirrors the Backrooms themselves. Both are endless prisons defined by isolation and confinement. And Mary's decision to study psychology and psychiatry can be viewed as an attempt to save others because she was unable to save her mother. And she continually is asking Clark when she's down there in the Backrooms, like, how can I help you? And then there's that concrete handprint Mary rescues from her demolished childhood home, which becomes like an important symbol. It represents the past she can't let go of, potentially, and serves as like a physical reminder of her mother's suffering that sticks with her. And she even ends up using it as an object against the entities within the Backrooms. And it's just interesting and frustrating, purposefully though, that like with this theory in mind, it's a kind of a bleak ending because even after escaping, Mary's intersected or stopped by the async and detained because of what she knows. And so like rather than actually being saved, she becomes trapped again in a different type of isolation later in life. And so then with the Backrooms making a copy of her, she is being condemned to the same kind of lonely, windowless existence that defined her mother's life. Whether any of these theories are correct, it's impossible to say. I mean, I think with movies like this, there is no one truth, which can either be exciting or frustrating to you, depending on your personality. And this is like kind of my final section, but just how this movie is making history. Like I mentioned before, wherever you land on the film's themes, theories, one thing is undeniable, that Backrooms has become a massive success story. The film opened to an estimated 81 million domestically and roughly 118 million worldwide, making one of the biggest horror openings ever. It's also became the largest opening weekend in A24's history, blowing past the studio's previous record holder, Civil War, which opened at 25.5 million, which I had no idea that Civil War did that well. That's actually very shocking to me. And that is one of the solo episodes I actually did for this podcast, was Civil War Deep Dive. I'm just now realizing I think all the solo episodes I've done were A24 movies, unintentionally. On top of that, the movie set several notable records. It's delivered one of the biggest debuts ever for original horror film, one of the largest openings for a first-time director working on an original project, one of the strongest R-rated openings of 2026. And what makes the numbers obviously even more impressive is the budget. The film reportedly cost around $10 million to make. And so by Hollywood standards, that's incredibly small. And when you compare that production cost to its opening weekend revenue alone, the Backrooms instantly becomes one of the most profitable launches A24 has ever had. A huge part of that success appears to be younger audiences. And what's even cooler, and I think I said this at the top of the episode, is that Backrooms isn't the only budget horror movies succeeding right now. At the exact same time, Obsession has been quietly dominating theaters as well. And I have to shout Skylar Zern, previous podcast guest, lifelong friend. She did the casting for Obsession, so I'm very proud of her. And you can listen to our episode with her on the Intermission podcast. But unlike Backrooms, Obsession was also made for very little money, reportedly under $1 million, depending on which reports you look at. Oh, also, Synagogue did the merch, the official Obsession merch. So a lot of connects to Obsession, big fans. And like Backrooms, it comes from a creator who built an audience online first, director and star Curry Barker, spent years making content on YouTube before transitioning into filmmaking along his comedic partner who also stars in the film, Cooper Tomlinson. So like with all that together, these two films represent just something bigger than individual success stories, but like a shift that's happening in horror and ideally in Hollywood as a whole. But whether you loved it, you hated it, the fact that we're still talking about it is probably the clearest sign that Backrooms has already secured its place in horror history. And regardless, I had a lot of fun watching this movie, talking about it with friends afterwards, which is the best part of going to the movies, is having your little debrief with your friends after, and then doing the research to record this episode. So I hope you enjoyed this audio essay and that you stay tuned for future Intermission episodes. We have cool guests coming, ideally more solo deep dives soon as well. If you have a movie that is coming out in the future that you think I should do a focused episode on, let me know. And now it's time to get lost.
Good evening.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. To stay in touch, follow our Instagram page at It's Intermission Time and share with your friends. As always, Intermission is produced by Jazeel Chu and Olivia Dean, and of course, hosted by yours truly, Megan Braun. This episode is brought to you by The Synagogue.